Back in the late 80s, there was a war going on. A war that only kids in the playground knew of. This war strained friendships, created enemies, and had you making the first hard choice of your young life.
What side were you on?
Nintendo or Sega? Hello, you kind of forgot the 7800. Shut up! Nintendo games like Mario and Zelda were Nintendo exclusives. Games like Shinobi and Afterburner were Sega exclusives, available only on... Wait a minute. What? Wait a second. These hacks? These games actually got physical releases. Some in America and some only in Japan, and some both. You're a liar. Had I made such a remark back then, I could have gotten stabbed with a pencil at the playground. It's no joke. And not just a regular pencil, mind you, but you know, one of those nice looking mechanical lead pencils. You ever seen those? You know, the transparent Nintendo ones? Had a huge chunk of the video game market back then. So developers would find ways around the Nintendo seal of quality and lockout chips to bring titles to the console in the hopes of tapping into that pot of gold. Because of this, plenty of Sega exclusive titles made the jump. Not just Nintendo, but other consoles such as the TurboGrafx as well. This was basically due to licensing. Sega had no problems licensing their IPs to other companies. And if you think about it, that wasn't a bad decision from a business point. Sega got paid regardless if the game sold or not. Plus, they got a chance to tap into the market from another angle. Gaming distribution. So at that point, they were not only developing hardware, but they were a software gaming development company as well, just lending out their name and titles to other companies. But for now, let's take a look at all the Sega titles that did get released on the Nintendo console, whether it's the NES or the Famicom. And then I'm going to compare them to the Master System counterparts and see how they fare. First up, Afterburner. This title actually had two releases on the Nintendo console. One in Japan, which was developed by Sunsoft, and one in the US developed by Tengen without permission from Nintendo. Not sure which of the two came out first to the market, but the Sunsoft Japan Famicom version seems to be slightly more polished. The title screen on it looks like a bit closer to the arcade version, and it even has the numerical 2 behind the logo, versus the US Tengen version, which only has the Afterburner title and some generic font for the start option. The gameplay is exactly what you would expect from such an intense graphical arcade game when shrunk into an 8-bit card. Slow, choppy scrolling, good luck trying to figure out what angle those missiles are approaching your plane. This here is how far I got into the game before I couldn't take it any longer. I'm sorry, I can't play this crap. Now let's take a look at the Master System version next to the Famicom and the NES ports. At least the colors and the graphics are a bit more faithful to the arcade. Same choppy gameplay though. If I had to decide which of the ones to play and recommend, I would definitely go with the arcade. Next up is Altered Beast. This game did get a port for the Famicom only in 1990, and it was developed by Interlink and published by Asmik. While the graphics here take a huge, and I'm talking huge dive, with level 1 immediately reminding you that you are playing watered down bleached versions of the game and setting your expectations lower than the ground, the game, believe it or not, is actually not that bad. You get past the odd controls which require you to press up to jump, cause Europe, and you're gonna find a game that offers more levels than the arcade and even Master System? I'll explain in a bit. The Famicom game offers up to 3 new levels on top of the existing arcade level, a forest level, an underwater section, and finally, a mountain that is covered in fire looking level, and each of them have you turning into a new form, such as, what the hell, Naked Fabio with a tail? What is going on here? A shark, and a phoenix humanoid looking bird that shoots flames. That's pretty damn cool. Even the new levels look actually pretty good. But the extremely small sprite of all the characters and the odd controls might have turned people away back then. Plus the fact that if you have played the arcade and gone down to this, yeah, you would probably immediately return it for a refund. The Master System port looks great. This one was actually released in 1989. The sprites are huge and colorful. The controls, they're pretty similar to the Famicom since, remember, the controllers, they only had 2 buttons. But this port only has 4 levels and the gameplay is much slower. So at this point you have to ask yourself, would you rather your game look this good and have missing levels, or look like this and have more levels and slightly faster gameplay. Or you could ask yourself, why am I playing either of these when I could just buy it for the Genesis?
Welcome to your doom.
Next, Alien Syndrome. This Sunsoft developed title of the famous arcade overhead action shooter is actually pretty damn good and quite faithful to the arcade. You got the selection screen intact, the level auto scrolls along and has the map feature, and almost all the weapons intact, although I could not find the little helpful robot options. I probably missed them. The bosses are large and colorful, and the enemies in each stage are properly represented. Granted, the music is very tedious and the sound effects are mediocre for the most part, but if I were a fan of the arcade game and wanted a solid port, this one was actually good. Fans of the Master System, however, sorry guys, you were not so lucky. First, the game is locked to one screen at a time. It does not auto-scroll anywhere like the arcade version. Second is the awful music and sound effects. Listen to the sound of my gun. Wow. There's also no map feature, at least none that I could find. You can enter a menu screen that only shows you the amount of hostages left to rescue, but where are they? You're just gonna have to find them. As far as the weapons go, the flamethrower is missing here, and that's not very helpful. I actually like that one. One of the few times Tengen actually outdid Sega at their own game, and that is only cause they published it. All they did was remove Sunsoft's name from the product and release the game as an unlicensed title. All in a day's work for Tengen. Next up is Fantasy Zone. This Sega arcade was ported to so many different consoles and computers that it was bound to appear on a Nintendo console sooner or later. We again got 2 ports of the game. In Japan it was developed by Sunsoft, and in the US, Tengen handled development. Oh boy. Both titles actually play well, with the Japanese port being slightly more colorful and feels a bit more fluid in terms of movements. The sound on the Japanese port is also improved over the US version. The Master System port in this case is the inferior one, believe it or not. Sunsoft did a way better job of porting it over to the Famicom and somehow making it almost as colorful as the Master System one. You have to remember, the Nintendo color palette was actually inferior to the Master System, yet you couldn't tell that by playing this game, I can tell you that. But overall, the graphics are better on the Famicom one. Now, how the hell does Sega let a third-party developer up them on their own game? How does that happen? Personally, I've never been a fan of Fantasy Zone, but if you are into this series, I would recommend the Sunsoft port over the others. Assuming of course you don't have access to the arcade. Fantasy Zone 2 was never ported to the US for the Nintendo. The Famicom version was once again handled by Sunsoft. This one is a good game with the music and overall gameplay being close to the arcade, but I think Sega felt embarrassed on how the previous title turned out and how they were outclassed on their own IP and pulled no punches here. The Master System version plays and looks like the arcade, minus the parallax scrolling in the back of course. The music is also slightly better with more bass to the tunes. Something that usually fell behind when pitted against its counterpart. I wonder if this game is running on some kind of specialized chip. The Famicom version is a good game overall, but I think the reason it did not get released in the US is that the Fantasy Zone series was not as big here as it was in Japan, and Tengen probably did not see it as a profitable project, and with them being tied up with Nintendo in court, that did not help out in the decision. Shinobi was a big title for Sega, especially in the arcades. And to actually see this title released on the Nintendo Entertainment System was a huge deal. This one was another unlicensed game by Tengen. If you saw my Shinobi Trilogy video, then this screen right here might cause some of your fears to resurface. I'm sorry. The truly scary part is that the game doesn't get better. This is a premonition right here what atrocities are about to engulf your senses. Again, I'm sorry. This port is quite possibly one of the worst excuses for a video game upon release. The levels all look like you're playing them after you have your eyes dilated. That sound that your character makes when you jump to a higher platform, oh god, it's so annoying here, and it's just like the Master System port actually. The bosses are barely fun to battle. The sound and the music are great. If this was an Atari 2600 game from 1981. Altered Beast had altered graphics, but at least the gameplay was manageable and it added stages to the game. This port of Shinobi is barely playable and I highly recommend you avoid it. The Master System is barely a good port too, but at least the graphics are more polished, making you feel like you're actually playing Shinobi versus this thing. Space Harrier was a massive hit by Yu Suzuki when it hit the arcades in 1985. It was a massive technological feat with a sit-down cabinet and controls to match. The Master System got a port in 87 before it hit the Famicom in 89. Takara developed the Famicom version that you see right here. While the character looks like he got stuck in a washing machine and shrunk a bit, the overall gameplay and scroll-like movement of the stages look pretty damn good for the hardware limitations the NES had. I was actually surprised at how smooth it ran versus what I had expected. Is it perfect? No, not by a long shot, but it looks good. The sprite for all the enemies and the level objects are smaller when compared to the Master System version, as well as the colors. They're a little bit more muted as well, but it does have all 18 levels of the game, minus a few bosses here and there. That's not bad. Now, while the Master System version looks vastly superior in terms of graphics, it plays way more choppy and tons, I'm talking tons more flickering. Unlike the Famicom version, the Master System used the background to animate the obstacles in each level, giving it that blocky, etched look. This one right here is a toss-up. On one side, you got very colorful graphics that are close to the arcade but choppy and massive flickering issues. Or you can go with the smaller sprites and overall washed up graphics but smoother gameplay. This is a real toss-up in terms of recommendation, or once again you can just play the Genesis sequel, or even better, the arcade. Now I know Wonder Boy did not come out on the NES or Famicom, however Hudson did release it with a slight makeover and retitled Adventure Island, which we all know by now. If you all want to know more about the whole Adventure Island Wonder Boy fiasco, check out my Wonder Boy series video. It is a mess, but it's actually an interesting mess. Now let's check out some Nintendo IPs that jumped over to the Sega side. With Nintendo having such a huge audience around the world in general, I guess it was inevitable for some titles to cross over as developers and even Sega themselves had the chance to score some nice profits along the way by lending out their IP and collecting money along the way. I can't blame them. Any of you out there played any of these ports or even heard of them? Share with us some of your experiences. In the meantime, keep watching and keep gaming.